What happens when a calm, composed guest walks onto a live talk show and ends up completely flipping the narrative on one of the most outspoken hosts on television? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera opens on the familiar set. The hosts are already mid-conversation, that casual but slightly charged energy that regular viewers instantly recognize. Joy Behar leans slightly forward, her tone already edged with skepticism as she finishes a point. Joy says, "I'm just saying, there's a pattern here with celebrities wanting sympathy for situations they willingly put themselves in." There's a soft murmur from the audience, some agreement, some hesitation. Whoopi glances sideways, sensing where this might go. "All right, let's bring in our guest," she says, shifting the tone slightly. "She's here promoting her new project, but you all definitely know her from, well, everything lately. Please welcome Dakota Johnson." Applause fills the room. Dakota walks out with a calm smile, composed, polite, waving slightly as she takes her seat. She greets everyone naturally, no forced energy. "Hi, thank you for having me," she says, settling in. Sunny smiles warmly. "We're happy you're here." Joy gives a polite nod, but her expression is already analytical. Whoopi begins, "So, Dakota, you've been in the spotlight a lot recently, not just for your work, but for conversations around Hollywood expectations, pressure." Joy cuts in slightly, not aggressively, but enough to shift control. "And controversy," she adds. "Let's not pretend it's just pressure." There's a slight pause. Dakota turns her head toward Joy, still calm. "Sure," Dakota says, "controversy if that's how people want to frame it." The audience reacts lightly, some chuckles, some interest building. Joy leans in. "Well, when you speak openly about the industry the way you have, people are going to respond. Some might say you're criticizing a system that made you successful." There it is, the first real push. Dakota doesn't rush her response. She folds her hands lightly, thinking for a second before speaking. "I don't think acknowledging reality is criticism," she says. "I think it's honesty." The audience gives a small but noticeable reaction, soft applause. Joy raises her eyebrows. "But isn't that convenient? To benefit from something and then turn around and say it's flawed." Dakota smiles slightly, not defensive but steady. "Everything can be flawed and still benefit you," she replies. "Those things aren't mutually exclusive." There's a louder reaction from the audience this time. A few claps, a few sounds. Whoopi leans back, watching carefully. Sunny nods subtly. Joy presses again. "But when you talk about unfairness or pressure, some people watching at home might say, 'Well, you chose this. Nobody forced you.'" Dakota turns slightly toward the audience, then back to Joy. "That's true," she says. "But choosing a career doesn't mean you're agreeing to every part of how it operates." There's a brief pause. The tension is building, but it's still controlled. Alyssa jumps in, trying to balance things. "I think what Joy is getting at is, there's a perception that celebrities sometimes disconnect from what regular people deal with." Dakota nods. "I understand that," she says. "And I think that perception exists for a reason." That answer softens the room slightly. But then she continues. "However," she adds, "that doesn't mean the issues we talk about aren't real. It just means they're different." The audience reacts again, this time more thoughtful than reactive. Joy tilts her head. "But do you see how it can come across as tone-deaf?" There's a sharper edge now. Dakota doesn't flinch. "I think what's actually tone-deaf," she says carefully, "is assuming that someone's experience isn't valid just because it looks different from yours." That lands. There's a noticeable shift in the room. A few audience members clap louder than before. Sunny leans back with a small smile, clearly intrigued. Joy pauses for the first time. "Okay," Joy says, adjusting slightly in her chair. "But let me ask you this. When you speak about these things publicly, do you think about the responsibility that comes with that?" Dakota nods immediately. "All the time." Joy continues, "Because words matter. And when people hear someone in your position talking about struggle, it can feel disproportionate." Dakota leans forward just slightly, her tone still calm but more direct now. "I agree that words matter," she says. "That's exactly why I choose them carefully." The audience quiets down, listening closely. "And I'm not comparing my experience to anyone else's," she continues. "I'm just speaking about my own." Joy responds quickly. "But once it's public, it becomes part of a larger conversation." Dakota nods again. "Yes. And that conversation should include nuance." Whoopi steps in slightly, sensing the growing intensity. "And nuance is something we don't always get on TV. she says with a half smile. Light laughter breaks the tension for a second. But Joy isn't done. So let's talk about that nuance, she says. Because from where some people sit, it still feels like complaining from a place of privilege. There's a slight gasp from part of the audience. Dakota doesn't react immediately. She takes a breath. Then she speaks. I don't think acknowledging pressure is complaining, she says. I think it's being human. Silence for a second. Then a wave of applause begins, stronger than before. Joy looks around briefly, then back at Dakota. And you don't think there's a line? Joy asks. Dakota meets her gaze directly. I think the line is dismissing people instead of listening to them, she replies. That's the moment the energy fully shifts. The audience reacts louder now. Clear applause, some people nodding, others leaning forward in their seats. Sunny quietly says, That's a good point. Whoopi watches both of them carefully, her expression neutral but engaged. Joy exhales slightly, not backing down, but recalibrating. All right, she says. We're going to keep this going. And you can feel it. The conversation has officially moved from casual interview into something much more intense, something real, something unpredictable. The kind of moment live TV can't control once it starts unfolding. Joy leans back for a brief second, almost like she's reassessing her angle, but you can tell she's not letting this go. The audience is still buzzing lightly from Dakota's last response, that shift in energy lingering in the air. So, Joy continues, her tone a little more measured now but still firm. Let's stay with that idea, being human. Because I don't think anyone's denying that. But when you have influence, when millions of people are listening, don't you think there's a responsibility to be more careful about how you frame things? Dakota nods slightly, like she's heard this question before. I do think about that, she says. But I also think there's a danger in overfiltering everything you say just to avoid criticism. A few people in the audience murmur in agreement. Joy responds quickly, or maybe it's not about avoiding criticism, it's about understanding impact. Dakota doesn't interrupt. She lets Joy finish. And sometimes Joy adds, it sounds like celebrities want to have it both ways. You want to be relatable, but also separate from the reality most people live in. There's a small ripple through the audience again. Dakota shifts slightly in her chair, still relaxed, but more engaged now. I don't think it's about having it both ways, she says. I think it's about being honest about where you stand while still acknowledging that other people have different realities. Sunny nods. That's fair, she says quietly. Joy glances at Sunny, then back at Dakota. But do you think that always comes across? She asks. Because perception matters just as much as intention. Dakota smiles a little. Perception matters, yes, she says. But I can't control how every single person interprets what I say. The audience reacts softly, some laughter, some clapping. Joy tilts her head. But you can anticipate it. Dakota pauses for a second, then leans forward just slightly. I can try, she says. But anticipating every possible reaction means you stop saying anything real. That line lands differently, quieter but heavier. Whoopi raises her eyebrows slightly. That's true, she says, almost to herself. Alyssa jumps in, trying to balance things again. But there's also something to be said about choosing your platform wisely, right? Like, when you say something in an interview versus on social media versus on a show like this, it carries different weight. Dakota nods. Absolutely, she says. And I think that's why conversations like this are important. Because you can actually talk things through instead of reducing everything to headlines. The audience claps lightly at that. Joy doesn't smile this time. But headlines exist for a reason, she says. They reflect what people take away. Dakota turns toward her again. Or they reflect what people choose to highlight, she replies calmly. There's a noticeable oh from the audience, low but present. Joy lets out a small laugh, not entirely amused. Okay, so now it's the media's fault? Dakota shakes her head immediately. No, she says. I didn't say that. I'm saying it's a shared responsibility. Sunny leans in. That's actually an important distinction, she adds. Joy looks at Sunny briefly, then back at Dakota. But do you think sometimes that responsibility gets ignored? Because it's easier to just say this is my truth and leave it at that. Dakota's expression stays composed, but there's a slight shift, more seriousness now. I think my truth is often misunderstood, she says. It's not about shutting down other perspectives. It's about adding to the conversation. The audience nods along, some clapping softly. Joy presses again. But when your truth contradicts what people are experiencing in real life, it can feel disconnected. Dakota doesn't hesitate this time. Or it can feel uncomfortable, she says. That hits. A louder reaction from the audience, some claps, a few surprised laughs. Joy leans forward. Uncomfortable how? Dakota meets her gaze directly. Because it challenges assumptions, she says. And people don't always like that. There's a brief silence after that. You can feel the tension tightening again. Whoopi steps in slightly. This is where it gets interesting, she says, half smiling. Because now we're talking about perception versus reality, and those don't always match. Joy nods. Exactly, she says. And that's my point. Dakota turns slightly toward Whoopi, then back to Joy. But whose perception are we prioritizing? She asks. That question shifts the energy again. The audience reacts, this time louder, more engaged. A few people clap immediately. Joy pauses for a fraction of a second. What do you mean? She asks. Dakota explains calmly. If we're saying perception matters, then we have to acknowledge that there are multiple perceptions happening at the same time. Sunny leans back, clearly following closely now. And mine, Dakota continues, is just as valid as anyone else's. Joy responds quickly. No one's saying it's not valid. Dakota nods. But it's being questioned more than others, she says. There's a slight shift in tone, still calm but more pointed. The audience picks up on it. A few murmurs ripple through the room. Joy raises her eyebrows. Because you have a bigger platform, she says. Dakota doesn't disagree. Yes, she says. And that's exactly why I think it's important to be honest instead of performative. That word, performative, lands hard. The audience reacts audibly now. Some claps, some wow whispers. Joy leans back slightly, crossing her arms for a moment before uncrossing them again. Are you saying people on this show are being performative? She asks. There's a noticeable shift. This is sharper now. Dakota doesn't take the bait emotionally. No, she says calmly. I'm speaking generally. Joy gives a small, tight smile. Convenient, she says. A few audience members react with a mix of laughter and tension. Dakota keeps her tone even. Not convenient, careful, she replies. Sunny lets out a quiet Whoopi watches both of them closely, clearly letting this play out. Joy leans forward again. Let me ask you something directly, she says. Do you think criticism of celebrities is unfair? Dakota shakes her head. No, she says. I think criticism is necessary. That answer catches Joy slightly off guard. But, Dakota continues, I think it should be thoughtful, not dismissive. The audience claps again, stronger this time. Joy nods slowly. And you think what I'm saying is dismissive? Dakota pauses. The room gets quieter. I think, she says carefully, that it can come across that way. There's a collective reaction, soft gasps, some claps, some tension-filled laughter. Joy exhales, looking briefly out at the audience before turning back. Well, she says, I'm not here to dismiss anyone. I'm here to question. Dakota nods. And I'm here to answer, she says. That line lands clean. The audience reacts instantly, applause louder now, more unified. Whoopi smiles slightly, shaking her head. All right, she says. Now we've got a real conversation. But you can feel it. The tone has shifted completely. This isn't just a discussion anymore. It's a live, unscripted clash of perspectives, and neither side is backing down. The applause lingers a little longer this time, and you can feel the shift in the room. It's no longer just a lively discussion. It's become something sharper, more personal, and the audience knows it. Whoopi raises her hand slightly, trying to keep things from tipping too far. All right, she says, half laughing. Everybody breathe for a second. A few people in the audience laugh, easing the tension just a bit. But Joy leans forward again, clearly not finished. Her tone is more direct now, less conversational. Since you said that, Joy begins, looking straight at Dakota, let's actually be clear. When you say criticism should be thoughtful, who decides what that means? There's a quiet from somewhere in the audience. Dakota doesn't rush. She nods once, like she's acknowledging the weight of the question. I think it starts with intent, she says. Are you trying to understand someone, or are you trying to reduce them to a headline? The audience reacts, soft claps, a few nods. Joy immediately follows up. But that's subjective, she says. What you see as reducing, someone else might see as holding accountable. Dakota leans in slightly. That's true, she says. But accountability and dismissal aren't the same thing. That line hits clean again. Sunny lets out a quiet, okay, clearly feeling the point. Joy tilts her head. So where's the line? She asks. Dakota answers without hesitation this time. The line is whether you're actually listening, she says. The audience responds louder now, applause building. Joy raises her eyebrows, a slight smile, but it's more challenging than friendly. You think I'm not listening? There's a slight tension spike. People in the audience shift in their seats. Dakota keeps her tone steady. I think you're listening to respond, she says, not to understand. That lands hard. A wave of reactions, some gasps, some clapping, a few "oh" sounds from the audience. Whoopi leans back, eyes widening slightly. Okay, she says under her breath. Joy sits back for a moment, clearly taken aback, not shocked but recalibrating. All right, Joy says slowly. That's an interesting take. But there's an edge now. Alyssa jumps in quickly, trying to diffuse things. I think what's happening here is two different perspectives on what public accountability looks like, she says. Sunny nods. Yeah, and also how it's delivered, she adds. Joy turns slightly toward them. But that's exactly my point, she says. If you're in the public eye, you don't get to control how it's delivered. Dakota responds calmly. I'm not trying to control it. Joy cuts in. But you're critiquing it. Dakota nods. Yes, she says. Because I'm part of it. That line shifts the energy again. The audience reacts, this time more thoughtful, less explosive. Joy leans forward. But do you see how that sounds? She asks. You're saying you don't want to control it, but you want it to change. Dakota smiles slightly, not dismissive but composed. Everything evolves, she says. Why shouldn't conversations? There's a beat of silence, then applause, steady and growing. Joy shakes her head slightly, but there's a hint of a smile now, like she respects the pushback even if she disagrees. Okay, but let me bring this back to something more specific, Joy says. Because we're talking in general terms, and that's easy. The audience quiets again. You've made comments recently, Joy continues, about expectations in the industry, about pressure, about how people are treated. And some people felt like you were speaking as if your experience represents everyone's. Dakota's expression becomes more serious. I never said that, she replies. Joy responds quickly. But that's how it was interpreted. Dakota nods. And that's exactly the issue, she says. Interpretation isn't always accurate. A few audience members clap. Joy presses. But perception becomes reality for people. Dakota leans forward slightly, her voice still calm, but more deliberate. Only if we stop questioning it, she says. That line lands differently, quieter but sharper. Sunny says softly, that's true. Joy looks at Dakota for a long second. So what you're saying, Joy says, is that people should question how they react to what you say. Dakota shakes her head slightly. No, she says. I'm saying people should question everything, including what I say. That gets a strong reaction. Applause rises again, this time more unified, more supportive. Whoopi nods slowly. That's a fair point, she says. Joy exhales, looking out at the audience briefly before turning back. But here's where I struggle, Joy says. Because there's a difference between encouraging thought and avoiding responsibility. Dakota responds immediately. I'm not avoiding responsibility. Joy leans in. Then what responsibility do you think you have? There's a pause. The room goes quiet. Dakota takes a breath. My responsibility, she says, is to be honest about my experience, to treat people with respect, and to listen when I'm challenged. The audience listens closely. And I'm doing that right now, she adds. That line hits. A loud wave of applause breaks out, stronger than anything before. Joy nods slowly, acknowledging it, but she's not backing down. All right, Joy says. Then let me challenge you. The room tightens again. Do you think, Joy continues, that sometimes what you call honesty can come across as entitlement? There it is, the sharpest question yet. A collective reaction from the audience, gasps, murmurs, a few scattered claps. Dakota doesn't react emotionally. She doesn't look away. No, she says calmly. I think it comes across as honesty. Joy responds quickly, even when people feel disconnected from it. Dakota nods. Yes, she says. Because discomfort doesn't equal entitlement. That line lands like a turning point. The audience erupts, applause louder, more sustained. Some people even stand slightly in their seats. Sunny leans back, shaking her head with a small smile. Wow, she says quietly. Whoopi lets out a low whistle. Okay, she says. Now we're really in it. Joy sits back again, taking a breath, clearly feeling the shift in the room. But she leans forward one more time. So you're saying, Joy says that the problem isn't what you're saying, it's how people are reacting to it. Dakota pauses for a second. Then she answers clearly and directly. I'm saying the conversation is bigger than one reaction, she says. Silence. Then applause, steady, strong, undeniable. At this point, it's clear to everyone watching, both in the studio and at home. This isn't just a debate anymore. Dakota isn't just responding. She's controlling the conversation. The applause doesn't die down quickly this time. It rolls through the studio in waves, louder and more sustained than anything earlier. You can see it on the hosts' faces. This moment has gone beyond a typical segment. Whoopi leans forward, hands slightly raised. All right, she says, trying to settle the room, though there's a faint smile on her face. Let's bring it down just a notch. The audience slowly quiets, but the energy is still there, charged, almost electric. Joy sits back, taking a breath. For the first time, she doesn't jump in immediately. She adjusts her posture, glances briefly at the audience, then back at Dakota. Okay, Joy says, her tone calmer now, less confrontational but still firm. I'll say this, you've made your point very clearly. There's a small ripple of laughter from the audience. Dakota gives a slight smile, not smug, just composed. I'm just trying to have a conversation, she says. Joy nods. And you are, she admits. Even if we don't agree on everything. That line softens the tension just a little. Sunny jumps in, smiling. I actually think this is what people want to see, she says. Real disagreement, but still respectful. The audience claps in agreement. Alyssa adds, yeah, because too often these conversations either get shut down or they turn into shouting matches. This didn't do that. Whoopi nods. No, this stayed right on that edge, she says, gesturing between them. And that's not easy to do on live TV. There's a light laugh from the audience. Joy turns back to Dakota. Let me ask you one last thing, she says. After all of this, do you think these conversations actually change anything? The room quiets again, but this time it feels different. Less tense, more reflective. Dakota thinks for a moment. I think they can, she says. Not immediately, and not always in obvious ways. But when people actually listen, even if they disagree, that's where change starts. A few audience members nod. Soft applause follows. Joy watches her for a second, then gives a small, almost reluctant smile. All right, she says. I can respect that. That gets a light reaction from the audience, some claps, some chuckles. Whoopi steps in, sensing the natural close. And that, she says, is why we have these conversations. She turns toward the camera slightly. Because not everybody's going to walk away thinking the same thing. But maybe they'll think a little more. Applause builds again, steady and warm this time. Dakota relaxes slightly in her seat, the intensity finally easing. She exchanges quick smiles with Sunny and Alyssa. Joy adjusts her notes, then looks back at Dakota. And good luck with your project, she adds, her tone now more neutral, almost cordial. Thank you, Dakota says. I appreciate it. Whoopi wraps it up. Dakota Johnson, everybody. The audience applauds as the camera pulls back slightly. But even as the segment ends, you can tell something unusual just happened. Off camera, the energy doesn't disappear, it shifts. Audience members are still talking among themselves as they begin to settle. Some are clearly on Dakota's side, praising how calm and direct she stayed. Others are defending Joy, saying she asked the questions people at home were probably thinking. One woman in the front row can be heard saying, she didn't lose her cool once. Not once. Another person responds, yeah, but Joy wasn't wrong either. That's why it got so intense. Backstage, producers are already reacting. That's going viral, one of them says, looking at a monitor replay. Clips are already being cut, another adds. And they're right. Within minutes of the segment airing, social media starts lighting up. Short clips begin circulating, especially the key moments. I think you're listening to respond, not to understand. Discomfort doesn't equal entitlement. I'm not trying to control it, I'm part of it. Each line gets reposted, dissected, debated. Some viewers are praising Dakota for staying composed under pressure. She handled that with so much grace. Calm, direct, and didn't back down. Respect. Others are siding with Joy. Joy asked the tough questions nobody else would. You can't ignore the privilege angle, she had a point. And of course, there are people arguing both sides at once. That's how discussions should be, no yelling, just real pushback. Clips from the show start trending across platforms. Reaction videos pop up almost immediately. Comment sections fill with debates, long threads analyzing tone, wording, even body language. Later that day, headlines begin to appear. Dakota Johnson clashes with Joy Behar in heated live TV exchange, calm versus confrontation. The View segment that has everyone talking. Did Dakota Johnson shut down Joy Behar? Or just shift the conversation? Different outlets frame it differently, but they all agree on one thing. It was a moment. By the evening, even people who didn't watch the full show have seen at least one clip. Talk show panels reference it. Online creators break it down. Some call it a shutdown. Others call it a balanced debate. But almost everyone agrees, it didn't feel scripted. It felt real. And back on set, after everything wraps, the hosts have their own reactions. Sunny turns to Joy quietly. That was intense, she says. Joy nods. Yeah, she replies. But it was a good conversation. Whoopi adds, that's what it's supposed to be. Dakota, as she prepares to leave, thanks the hosts again. No tension, no drama off camera. Just a professional close to a very public moment. And that's what makes it stick. Not shouting. Not chaos. Just two people refusing to back down, but also refusing to lose control. So now it's your turn. What did you think about that moment? Was Dakota Johnson right to push back the way she did? Or did Joy Behar raise points that needed to be said? Drop your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.